Good morning. As we mentioned last week, we're doing a few sermons leading up to Friend Day to help prepare us for Friend Day. And so we're on part 2 of a 3-week sermon series preparing us for Friend Day and how to go about having an effective Friend Day. And I want to remind you that Friend Day is November 6th. So start putting that on your calendar. Make sure you're here. Start inviting everybody to come to that. But I also want to remind you of a few things, talking with Andy, who's in charge of Friend Day, and is the deacon over it. Here are some of the things that he wants emphasized is that, one, it's part of our mission. As Christians, our call as Christians is to make disciples. And one of the things that this church has done has created a mission in which they say, loving people one step closer to Christ. We want to love people, but not just love people, but we want to bring them into a saving relationship with Jesus Christ. But what are some things that will help us be prepared for Friend Day? What is the mentality and what is the purpose of Friend Day? Here are some things that they came up with. Friend Day, it's not just about an event. It's about evangelism. Our goal is not just to put on a good show for one day. Our goal is to help people hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. The second thing they want to emphasize is it's not just about numbers. Now, we care about numbers because every number is a person, and every person has a name, and every person with a name has a story, and that God cares that person. And that person should be included in God's story. But more so than just making sure we have a big number of people on one day, our goal is to draw people ultimately to Christ and His church. It's not also just about the saved. This is a huge opportunity where we can reach out in boldness to reach the lost of our community. It's not just about a great day, but it's an opportunity to establish relationship with people in our community, to help them come to know Christ, to love them one step closer. And ultimately, it's not about us. Our Friend Day is not about us. It is always, and always should be, and always will be about Jesus Christ for His glory. So, with this in mind, this is one of the things why Friend Day is so important, because it follows back with that mission of loving people one step closer to Christ. When I was a kid, I remember hearing a missionary stand up one day. He came from India, and he was speaking in front of all of us, and he had all these slides of pictures, and he had this great lesson, and he was telling us all about his work in India. And I remember hearing him talk, and I was getting this idea of what it meant to share the gospel. And I kept thinking, so the idea is you become someone like this missionary, and you go to a far-off place, and that's where mission occurs. But as I got older, the more I realized that it wasn't just left to the missionaries. The more I realized it wasn't just about going to a foreign land and sharing the gospel with people. But it was waking up every day and realizing that God has placed you in your own personal mission field, that God has called and expects you to make known His name. You know, as I got older, the more I realized every single Christian is a missionary. Now, it may not be as glorious or attractive as saying, hey, I went to this foreign country and I'm sharing the gospel. But it is glorious when you know it is the will of God for me to share the gospel with other people. And that God has placed me in the presence of others who I know and I see every day to reach them with the gospel. You know, in Acts the 17th chapter, one of the things that Paul made known to the people on Mars Hill is saying, you know what? God has designated the time and the place and the location where every person would live. but that God was not too far from each of them. And as I thought about that, I thought about how Jesus called us to make disciples and how he made known in that Great Commission that if we would, he would be with us. God gave us his Spirit. He gave us his Word. He gave us his Son who's next to us when we're making disciples. And so when I think about this idea, I think anytime I'm around other people because the Spirit of God lives me, because Jesus is with me, then God should surely be near all the lost people I come in contact with. God is surely near. He's near because he's everywhere, but more so because God has placed Christians around lost people. So lost people are near to God through us. Have you ever thought about that? That maybe God placed someone at a particular time and place, and here in Kokomo or Greentown or Rushville or Logansport, and God has placed them in your proximity. Because God has called and purposed you to share with them the gospel. That God is near to them because of you. Have you ever thought that someone could come to know Jesus because of you? Now, when I talk about this idea of all of us being missionaries and sharing the gospel, we all know the Bible, we all know the Great Commission, we all agree, we say, yeah, we all need to share the gospel. But I'm tired. I'm busy. I just don't have much time, I'm working all the time. I'm at home resting. My kids have sports and things like that. And I think that's one of the reasons why, as we covered last week in the Great Commission, when he says, go and make disciples, the original language actually has the terminology that says, as you are going. Jesus' mentality is, as you're going about living your life, make disciples. It's not a one-time event where you wake up and say, okay, from 2 to 3 alone, I'll go and make disciples. It's saying every moment of your life is an opportunity to touch people's lives for the sake of Christ. And so I think about this. God has placed you where he wanted you. He placed people who are lost in your vicinity. And you may say, well, I work. I'm busy. But maybe we should transform the way that we view our mission field. Maybe we should start seeing that where we are working at is our mission field. Maybe we should see where we're living is our mission field. Because if you ask people, where do you spend most of your day, where do you spend most of your time, people will say, work, school, or home. Isn't that true? Is that where you spend most of your time? But if that's the case, are you seeing your workplace as the mission field? Are you seeing your school as the mission field? Are you seeing where you live, your neighborhood, as a mission field? This is what we need to do. We need to get out of the mentality of thinking, well, missionaries go to a far-off place and then they share the gospel. No, we're missionaries here and now and today. And where we live and where we go every single day is our mission field. And those are the opportunities God has called us to make known his word. One of the things that we asked this question last week is, who should I bring to Friend Day? Who should I bring the gospel to? Last week we talked about our family and our friends, and we looked at some of the stories of how Jesus even made known his family would come to believe in him. We looked at how Philip found his friend Nathaniel and brought him to Christ, because that's what friends do. They shared the truth. They shared the most exciting thing. So we looked at the influence that friends and family have, the opportunity, the statistics, the advice. So we covered friends and family last week, but who should we cover this week? Who are some other people we can reach out to? The first one that I want us to look at is our neighbors. Our neighbors. And look at how Jesus is going to, in the verse we're going to be talking about, he's going to be talking to a woman. He's going to be talking to this Samaritan woman, and this woman who has a bad reputation. As you can see, in the time of day that she went to go and fetch water, she was alone. And she was alone because she was a social outcast. She was considered an immoral woman. And the time of day she went, she obviously didn't go at the time that the other ladies would typically go. But as she was there drawing water, Jesus spent some time talking with her. And he starts up a conversation talking about this living water, talking about who he is, talking about worship, and how God is trying to find the true worshipers of God. How he's trying to find them, and he sent Jesus to be the one to help bring that about. But do you see how the woman responds? She didn't just say, hey, I now have a relationship with the Son of God. I now have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Let me go and just enjoy that relationship by myself. No, what she does is she goes back home. She goes and she talks with her neighbors. She talks with the people she knew. She went and she shared the gospel. She could not hold it to herself. She didn't worry about what her reputation was. She didn't worry about every obstacle. Her thought was, this man's offering the living water. He's offering truth. He's offering worship and salvation. And she went and she told. Look at what this text says in regards to this woman that Jesus shared the gospel with. Look at her response. In John chapter 4, verse 28 through 30, it says this. So the woman left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, come see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ? They went out of the town and were coming to him. Look at how this woman went home. She went to her town. She went among her neighbors, and she was telling them, look, I found this guy. He's the Messiah. He's the Christ. And because she was so excited, despite her reputation, they still had to see for themselves, this woman is excited. Why? Is it possible? And they went out to see Jesus. Look at a continuation of it in chapter 4, verse 39 to 42. Look at because of what she did, because she went to her neighbors, look at the response. It says, many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me all that I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days, and many more believed because of his word. They said to the woman, it is no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world. It's not something that you want for your neighbors. That people, because your sin, you know your sin, you know your garbage, you know all the things, so it's easy to hide from your neighbors because you don't want people looking at you from the other side of the fence. But because you're so excited, you say, you know what, here's a man who offers living water, a relationship with Jesus Christ. And here, I have to tell people. I will tell the people in my town. I will tell my neighbors. And hopefully, I will say, here's the Christ, and come and see. And they'll come and see for themselves. And they'll come to know Jesus. I want you to ask yourself for a question. How many of you have neighbors? Some of you may live in the boondocks, but in all honesty, many of you have neighbors. How many of you actually know your neighbors? How many of you actually spent time with your neighbors? Know what they do for a living? Know what they do for fun? Care about each other when something happens? You know, and if that's not the case, you spent all this money on this house or this apartment, and you're living in it. But here's people who live on the left and right of you and across from you who need Jesus. That's your mission field. Within that radius, have you gone to them and ever shared with them the gospel? Can you imagine being someone on the day of judgment and saying, you know what, I had a Christian living right next to me, and not once did they ever approach me about Jesus. And it was right there, in the house right next to mine? Are you telling me salvation was literally next door? And I didn't know anything about it. You know, this is where we have to consider our neighbors. You know, when I went off to college, my last 2 years of college, I got placed into a dorm with someone I didn't even know. So the first day I met this kid, nice kid, but he found out really quickly that I was a Christian, and he wasn't. And in fact, he was an atheist. My last 2 years of college, I actually roomed with an atheist. And he was an atheist not so much because I think that he didn't necessarily just believe in God. I honestly believe it's because both of his parents, who were doctors, just taught him not to believe in God. But I remember seeing him struggle with his schoolwork. And he almost quit a few times, and I would just tell him, don't quit. Don't quit. And I remember one time he asked me, he said, Micah, how do you handle it? I see how busy you are. You're in student government. You're doing work. You have a girlfriend and fiance, and you go help with this church. How do you handle all of it? And I said, Jesus Christ. And I remember going to my shelf. In the congregation I grew up in, they gave every graduate a really nice leather Bible. And I remember grabbing that leather Bible off the shelf, and I handed it to him. And I gave it to him as a gift. And I said, I want you to know Jesus, because he's what's going to get you through. And at that moment, I asked him if he would be willing to have a Bible study, and we studied. And to tell you the truth, he was excited. But then he went home, and he was excited. He brought his Bible home to his parents, and his parents bashed Christianity, bashed him, and bashed me. And when he came back, he said, my parents told me I can't really be friends with you because of Jesus. Now, we still roomed together the next year, so his parents must have thought I was a good influence on him because he didn't do anything bad. But I gave him the opportunity to hear the gospel. And I don't know where he is. Maybe he accepted Christ. And I prayerfully hope so. I don't know where he is. I can't find him. He's not on Facebook. But even though he came back and his parents told him not to believe in Jesus, I was really encouraged that he kept that Bible and he still had it on his bookshelf. And he was my neighbor because he was literally sleeping 4 feet away from mine in this small little dorm. I also think about how since we moved here in Kokomo, we have some really good neighbors, and Disney spends time with our neighbors every week and babysits their kids every week. We have some really good neighbors, and this last year, we put on a barbecue for our neighbors, and Paige went out and handed out flyers, and some of our neighbors came. One of our neighbors actually was housing 3 of the Kokomo soccer players in their house, 3 Muslim men from Europe. And they came over. They obviously found out what I did for a living. And we talked a little bit about Jesus. We talked a little bit about soccer. We talked a little about America. And I remember just hearing their stories. And one of the things they said was, coming from Europe and growing up in the Muslim faith, they had all these ideas of what Americans were like and what Christians were like. And they were just like, you guys are so completely different from what I really thought. And that's the thing. They didn't know. They said in Europe and in our Islamic faith, we don't have neighborhood barbecues. You don't invite your neighbors over. You keep to yourself. I can't believe you guys would do this. And I'm hoping that those 3 young men will have maybe had a little bit different view of what Christians are really like, just because we simply had them over for a barbecue. Maybe that would be that one step closer to Christ. They may not have accepted him right then, but maybe just that little bit, maybe put something in their mind saying, maybe there's something to this Jesus in Christianity. You see, being a good neighbor is something that you can do to help reach people for Christ. They live next to you. And remember, salvation is literally next door to them because of you. God is near them because of you. Imagine the stories where your neighbors can say, I came to Christ because of my neighbor. I heard the gospel because of my neighbor. We didn't just give each other cookies at Christmas time. They gave us the gift of eternal life. Imagine how that is the greatest thing you could do for your neighbor. And are you doing that? So one of the things that you can do for your neighbor is share with them the gospel. Have them over for a meal. Mow their lawn. Do something nice. Start up a conversation. And invite them to Friend Day. Invite them to a Bible study. Invite them over to your home. Because we don't want anyone to ever say salvation was next door and I never knew about it. The next group of people that we want to reach out is coworkers. Do you know what's really interesting is how many of you work right now or have worked? Okay? We work. Do you guys work a lot of hours? Okay, we all work a lot of hours. We're Americans. We work. But here's the thing. There have been studies that came out saying that we spend more time with our coworkers than we do our children. I want you to think about that for a moment. You know, you think about mission field and you think about, well, I'm too busy at work. I don't have time to go evangelize. But here's the thing. There's people who you see every single day more than your own kids every single day. And that's an opportunity. You know their stories. You know that commonness that you have because you both hate your boss or whatever, or the job struggles are the same or whatever. You guys share what's happening in each other's lives and what your kids are doing and what vacations you're going on or whatever it may be. But are you sharing and looking at your coworkers and saying, you know what? We have this relationship. Are we doing anything about it? And are people seeing your life different? And because of that difference, they say, I want what they have. Do you know what's really interesting? We have Walt McAdoo. We know what Walt did at Delco. Do you know what's really interesting? I've been out in the community, and I'll mention what church I'll go to, and they'll be like, oh, isn't that where Walt goes? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, I love that guy. He was kind to us. His family has good singing voices. But how many people has Walt tried to reach for the gospel at Delco? And to do so from a managerial standpoint, that's dangerous. You know, I used to do that in the business world, and I'd get kind of frowned upon about it. I did it anyways. But that's one of the things. Here are people you are laboring with on a daily basis. You guys are sharing the work together, and to say, you know, what's more important to me than even this job is Jesus Christ. You know, that's something that you can share with because you have a relationship with them. You see them more than your own kids. And say, I want to share with them. You know, the book of Colossians, Paul really is an evangelistic person. He gives us some good advice for evangelism. And before he gives some really good evangelistic advice, he really tells them, you know, do a good job at work. Be that moral person at work. Work hard for the Lord and do so, and in doing so, people will see something different in you. Are people even asking questions? And in your workplace, do people even know you're a Christian? Do people know where you attend worship services? Do they know the ministries that you're involved in? Because those are good conversation starters. Because you could say, you know what, my job's important, but what's even more important is my faith. And this is where we can influence people we see every single day. Look at this. In Colossians 3:22-25, it says, bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. Continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving, and at the same time pray also for us that God may open to us a door for the word to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I am in prison, that I may make it clear which is how I ought to speak. Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Now we know we all have limited time. We need to make the best use of it, and a lot of our time is at work. We're supposed to work really well. We're supposed to work hard. We're supposed to work for the Lord. People are to see it. Not just be people pleasers. People are to see a difference in us. And we are to pray for this open door. Well, God has given you an open door when he gave you a job. Because when he gave you that job, he didn't just say, that's food on the table. Those are clothes on your kids' back. He says, that is a mission field for you. And do you pray every day for your coworkers saying, God, I work with these people, I care about these people, and I want to share with them the gospel. God, open that door. You opened one door by giving me this job. Open another door where I can have a conversation and a relationship with them and share with them the mystery of Christ. Do you do that? Are we following Walt's example? You know, I used to do that when I was in the business world. I used to take out my employees and out for dinner. But I would always somehow try to bring about that conversation to Christ. You know, one of the things that I want you to realize is you'd be amazed at how living godly and being like Christ and being different from everyone else in the workplace makes a huge difference. What if you were known as the most moral person in your office or in your factory? What if people knew that they could count on you, that you're a good person, a good man, a good woman? What if when life gets hard, you'd be the first person to turn to? You'd be amazed at how a few conversations about Jesus and living upright and treating people well makes a huge difference. You know, I've shared this story before, but, you know, there's one kid, a young kid who worked for me as an employee. He drove a forklift for me in one of my warehouses. And he was an immature party animal, loved to party. Every night he went and partied, drank, and everything like that. He had a lifestyle of homosexuality that he knew I didn't approve of. But one day he gave me a call. It was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And he said, can you pick me up from this place? I just got beat up. So I ran, got my clothes on, got in the car, drove, and I picked him up. He had black eye and everything. He was seriously beaten up. And as we were driving, I said, why'd you call me? Out of all the people, you can't call your boss now and say I'm sick. I knew what you were doing. He said, because you're the only person I could think of I would know would actually come. And I thought about that. He knew I was opposed to his lifestyle. He knew I hated drinking and partying. He knew I emphasized Christ. He knew I took him out to lunch and shared with them about my faith. But he thought of me. Is that what your coworkers do for you? How you work, your work ethic, your morality in the workplace, the way that you treat people in the workplace makes a huge difference so that when life gets hard, they may just think of you. They may just respect you enough to say, you know what, you keep talking about this Jesus and how he is changing your life. I respect you enough to listen now. I'm ready for it. And you know what? Maybe they're just hoping that you will be the one to keep bringing it up. And that's one of the things I realized about my coworkers back when I worked in the secular world, was they wanted to hear, but they wanted me to be the one to bring it up, because it's uncomfortable. No one often says, hey, tell me about Jesus. They want Christians to say, let me tell you about Jesus. You have a mission field when God gave you a job. These are people who you spend time with every day, every week. More hours than even your own kids. So think about how the two most common places you spend your day, at work and at home. That's your mission field. Your coworkers and your neighbors. If you want to know, not everyone's going to go to an India, not everyone's going to go to an Africa. But everyone has a place to live and a place to work. So start evangelizing and sharing the gospel of Christ. And as I've mentioned before from last week, invite them to Friend Day. And one of the greatest pieces of advice that unchurched people gave to Christians is the encouragement, don't stop asking. And on average, it takes 6 to 10 times for someone to finally say yes. So start praying for your neighbors. Start praying for your coworkers. Last week I gave you the homework to write down family members and friends who need Jesus Christ and to pray for them, to contact them, and to invite them. Now I'm giving you another piece of homework. Make a list of every coworker and neighbor that you have. And if you don't know your neighbors, go get to know your neighbors and invite them. Pray for them and encourage them. Because we're going to reach and we're going to make known salvation so that our neighbors will say, I found salvation next door. I found salvation in the work booth right next to mine. If we do this, God will be glorified and people will be saved. So let's prepare for Friend Day by inviting those people. If today you want to give your life to Christ or place membership with the church, or if you want us to just simply pray for you, we want to offer you that invitation as we now stand and sing.